Okay, so we are recording now, and I'll just do a bit of an interview. Don't worry, we'll edit this in case that it's not as good as we are expecting in our dreams. In the last interview I made, it was a disaster, so I had to heavily edit it. A quick intro for Luke. Uh, so we are tonight with Luke Crane, the author of Miseries and Misfortunes, alma mater of the renowned game publisher Burning Wheel, and a key reference in the indie RPG scene. He's better known for his acclaimed book games Burning Wheel, Mouse Guard, or Torchbearer, among other things, but he has also done a ton of other interesting things like making board games, teaching game design at the New York University, or writing about his favorite topics in Ludological Alchemy, a wonderful Substack. Now that you know a bit better, Luke, just greet him. Good evening, Luke. Thanks a lot for accepting the interview. We know that your time is precious, so we are very appreciative of your acceptation. We'll be screening this interview on the day of the presentation, well, not the full interview, just a small bit of it. So we are delighted that in a way you will be able to be present on that important day. And we'll start with a few questions about the game itself, which is Miseries, and then maybe, if we have time, we'll go to other aspects.
Great.
Sure. So our first question is very basic, and it is present in the intro itself, in the introduction of the game itself, but still we wanted to ask, what brought you to creating a book about this period of the 17th century in France? We know that you are fascinated by that time, but we wonder also if there is any story behind it or any other reason that brought you to make this game.
Yeah, it's a long journey, and many different roads walked to get to this particular game. I don't know if D&D was my first role-playing game. I don't think it was. I think I played Paranoia as my first role-playing game. But it was, but I did play D&D when I was a kid, and I liked it just fine. And then I came back to it after college, and we played. And then I came back to it a third time when we were doing research for Torchbearer. And that's when I had a very different perspective on research, on history, and not just of of historical things, but also of games. I had a better analytical mind for games. I had published a few games at that point. So we just were able to take a dispassionate look at D&D. And in particular, we played the 1981 edition, edited by Tom Moldvay, that is just wonderful. And we played the hell out of it, and playing a lot of the classic adventures like Keep on the Borderlands. And this may seem like a long tangent, but it's actually very important, because in Keep on the Borderlands, one of the ways that you survive those dungeons is by getting into rank with, men-at-arms at the front with shields and axes or swords or something, and then fighters behind them with spears and halberds. And it struck me. I was like, this is intentional. This is all very intentional. And then as I started to read more and more of John Peterson's research about the origins of D&D, I realized just how intentional it was, that they played pike and shot war games. They loved this period of history in the 17th century, more than anything, than any other period. That the mechanics of a D&D party emulate kind of this pike and shot style thing. Like magic users, right, are arquebusier, right? They've got some kind of firearm essentially that can blast the hell out of you but once. So I was in this mode, and obviously even Burning Wheel right away, you can see that I love history. I love finding cool historical details and trying to layer them into a game in a credible way. But Burning Wheel is not a historical game; it's a fantasy game. And so at one point I was on a bike ride home from work at Kickstarter, and I was thinking about this, like thinking about our D&D sessions, and I said, well, what if the magic user wasn't a magic user? What if the magic user was a necromancer? And what if the spear was a pike? And what if there was a musket? Like, how would that work if these things are true? And, and I kind of became obsessed with this idea of like, could you pike in a dungeon? Could you do?
We actually loved the way pikes work in that game in Miseries and Misfortunes, and also the old musketry part, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And then, so it actually took me months and months, maybe even close to a year of these bike rides where I'm thinking like, I don't know. And finally, I remember I was on the Kosciuszko Bridge, or maybe the Pulaski Bridge, and riding to work, and it just hit me. I was like, oh, right. Like you have to do this, and this in order to get it to feel right. And, the technology that I developed for the, that kind of game mechanic in Miseries isn't new. Like having initiative by weapon type is an ancient piece of gaming technology. But it was what was necessary in this game to begin to have it feel right, because the way we humans murdered each other in mass in the 17th century was very peculiar and particular, and had its own pacing and mechanics and whatnot. And I really wanted to enhance that feel, even though like it's there in basic D&D with grid combat and turns and spells that are expendable. But I wanted more and more of it. So that all was T-boned. So that was all happening in my head. But I, in high school, we're all required to read, or we used to be required to read Dumas, like the Three Musketeers. And I didn't do it. I somehow avoided it or dodged it, or my high school didn't assign it. And I always assumed that it was going to be like something boring and dated and whatnot. And so soon after I encountered Tor Olafsson, my editor, he was like, have you read this? And I said, no, because I have stupid reasons why not. And he said, dude, just read it this weekend. And I was like, oh, okay, you're right. This is incredible. And so we talk, like we really just began to incorporate these ideas of adventure fiction that Dumas brings to all of us. We try to get them into our games as much as possible. But the second book in the D'Artagnan romances, 20 years after, just rocked me. Like, I just thought it was such a baller move Dumas is one of the most famous people in the Western world at this point, on the back of Three Musketeers, right? He toured all over Europe. He toured in Russia. He toured in the US. His stuff was released in serial. I just would imagine they must have been waiting for each chapter to come out, and then they would read it. They'd probably all read it together. It was like us, waiting for the next episode to drop. Like, it was huge. And so for him, to write a couple novels and then be like, yeah, I'm making a sequel. Ready. Smash cut 20 years later, fuck you. And they're all sad old men. I was like, no, what? It's an incredible novel, just on obeying the adventure fiction norms that he creates. It's incredible, but I had to read it twice to really get it, because first I'm just like, but what about their other adventure? They must have had other adventures. No, he's like, fuck you, none of that. They had sad careers that went nowhere, and I obviously just adored that. But then I started to as I read it again, I was like, what is he talking about with Mazarin and this Frond and this king being executed? Like, what's going on here? And so I started reading, and I was like, oh, this is a thing that was actually happening 20 years later. So he's cutting from the siege of La Rochelle to this next historical moment, and he's found this incredible historical moment where another place where he can involve Anne in this really meaningful way, and where she's being pressed, politically from all sides. Mazarin is coming into his own, and the more history I read, the more research I did, the more I encountered Dumas in the shadows of it, right? I found his footsteps, his fingerprints. I found exact characters that he had taken, from history and put them into the story. And I just realized that, right, like the spirits were talking to me and said, you gotta just do this. You have to honor this. These are so many things that you love. So like I said, it's many roads that led me there. But I felt really good about making it.
Okay, that's a great answer. I wasn't expecting the mention to the 20 years after. Actually, there is a detail in the main in the book number 1, where you hint this, no? But thank you for your answer. I have another question also related to misery and misfortunes, which is that we noticed that miseries and misfortunes is made up of many subsystems and moving or depending parts. It's like a bit of burning wheel in a way, or torchbearer. In those books, you mentioned that you need about 12 sessions to get to know the system and to get acquainted and familiarized with how it works and so on. Do you think that this game is also complex enough to require any set number of sessions to play, or you just can go in and get to know it directly?
Yeah, so Miseries is a really interesting little gift that I have, it's a secret gift that I've slid over to you all, because it is built using D20 and die rolls for damage and all these conventions that are from the dawn of the hobby. However, it has some of my most modern, most sophisticated views on game design packed in there, where I just say okay, the 20-sided die is just a resolution mechanic. We can begin to build around that. We don't have to give that any special place of honor. There's all sorts of things, all sorts of affordances in Miseries that I had to build to get it to work. And I had to really, really pour myself into that game for it to not be a disaster. Now, the other weird thing about the game is I had to design it. I designed it in public over many years. The first version was a joke, was a zine that I released where it was just I'm going to Gen Con, I'm going to make a zine of the Necromancer and the Soldier of Fortune. And the Jesuit, and just see what happens. But when I played it, I was like, oh, fuck, this doesn't work. And then I did another version, and I realized that in order to really deliver on the promise of the game, I had to go even deeper into it. So one of the affordances that I had to design, especially when I made the second iteration, was providing you support to be able to just step in and play, where you don't have to invest in a full campaign. You don't have to read the whole history books or anything like that, where you can just grab a character and you can find yourself in a familiar situation, right? You can find yourself on the Seine, on a barge, on a foggy night, smuggling someone into Paris. And any role-playing gamer knows what's going on there, right? They know when they hear the first musket shot, from the wharf where they're about to land, that something's gone wrong. They've been betrayed, double-crossed or something, right? I had to build the experience conditions for the players, so you can just read here are 6 things that I should be looking for to do at any time in play, and then and the same thing here, for your politics and your religion, here are some basic things that you should be thinking about. That are all historical. That if you follow my guidelines, if you're able to reference the sheet and be it says this, so okay, I'll scream at him about being a Protestant or something. Like, great, you're being historical. Fantastic.
That's it.
So, and then the other like modulator for the game is the mortal coil stuff, where you get to reroll dice based on your life expectancy. And what's really fun is that in a single session, that mechanic means something different than in a campaign. Right? In a single session, you can make this about the final act of your life, and you're going to go out in a blaze of glory, and it's like you're going to be completely victorious, and then you're going to drop dead afterwards. You're going to walk away with your head held high, and then your heart's going to stop. It's great. But in a long-term campaign, you play it differently, where you meter out those expenditures. You know that you're going to be here next week, and so you don't want to burn too brightly in any one moment. So I did a better job about providing some flexibility for if you want to just jump in and do a one night scenario, or if you want to try to play out the life of this character.
That's actually that I didn't catch on that detail where you can use the mortal coil just for one shots. That's interesting.
Oh yeah.
Now that actually you touched an element where I was planning to ask this later, but our colleague Pau Martinell asked us something about how you design games. And maybe just too generic a question, but just in case you can give us any hint. Our idea is you make rather complex systems, and he was wondering if you create the systems from the global and then step into the detail, or if it is the other way around and you just create the smaller elements and then improvise to something bigger. I don't know if you can answer this question.
It depends. I'm always just looking for the hook. It's usually a detail. It's usually like one mechanism inside of a subsystem that makes sense to me, and then I can build out from there. Like for Misèries, it was literally like, what if the matchlock musket shot first before a halberd got to drive it home, provided that the halberd wasn't already like knocking on the door of the musket. Like what if the musket was like you needed like a 14 to hit? Okay, well then a pistol and a harquebus would have to go before the musket because they have different mechanisms that are faster. Okay, and right, like it was just that was the conversation in my head as I'm riding my bike. And so I had the concept. I knew, but the other question of like pikes in dungeon, can we do pikes in dungeon? We tried, and not really. The answer is there's a reason why you don't. If you want to have an 18-foot long piece of wood going around narrow dungeon corridors, like it's challenging. But that's another discussion why. But I tend to have a concept. I tend to have a feeling that I'm going for. I also tend to be looking for, it's a design exercise. So I'm looking for a problem that I'm trying to solve. So in this case, the problem at the table that I'm trying to solve is like, can we actually make 17th century stuff, like historical 17th century stuff, fun? Can we make it interesting, engaging, accessible? And then I go from there.
Okay, so thank you for your answer. Then we are going with a big question for us, which is going to be, we are asking it on the fourth place, but most of our followers would ask it first right away, just before saying hello, which is how much to Catalonia? How is it that how that book came how did it come to be? How is it that Luke Crane decided to create this game, this sample scenario for a game set in France, but moving it to Catalonia? Is there any link you have with the country, or just interest or any story there?
So as I mentioned, I fell in love with history after dropping out of college. I was, in terms of like academic studies, I was never very interested. But once I had my own freedom of thought, I became intensely interested, and I would do deep dives into periods in history, and so as I described, I became obsessed with this, and I love the conceit of also a year, right? Of a year of history, and then can you move around the world essentially in that year and show different slices of life in that year? And the answer is yes. And so I had this, still the concept for Misèries is that we're going to start in Paris and we're going to go from west to east around the globe. And so Catalonia is the first stop. But I've never been. I've been to your neighboring country. I've been to Spain a couple times, but I've never been to Barcelona. I've never been to Catalonia. And I had no conception of the Catalan role in history at this particular moment when I started Misèries. But when I was making the transition, after I put it all together into one actual book, and I had the religion and the politics, and they're all very high level. And one of my game designer friends and his crew tried to play it, and they're really excited, and they're like, there's no support for the casual player in here. There's nothing in here that teaches us how to enter this world. So I thought about that, but then I started playing it, and then one of the things I noticed is that Americans have a very strange reaction to Paris. First of all, I don't understand, but it's generally negative when you tell them they'll be playing Parisians or whatnot. It's weird, but maybe you sympathize. I don't know, but it's just a cultural thing. But more than that is that what I found is that the players were they got that brain freeze that too much meta plot gives you in a vampire game or whatever, where you don't understand, that there's factions and things are moving, but you don't have all the information, and you're afraid to make a move. So when we were doing the play tests, I could see that the players were just cautious to an unreasonable degree when they were starting off in Paris. And, so I was like, all right, I need to do the literary trick. I need to do the Dumas trick where, D'Artagnan doesn't start in Paris. He comes to Paris. He's Gascon, and he goes north with his letter and his swayback nag. So I needed a place for you to begin, and then and work your way to Paris with kind of knowledge of where you were going and what you would be doing there. I didn't want to go too far afield, and so I just started reading. I also realized that in that I needed another, not a literary conceit, but a conceit of one of my favorite historians, Barbara Tuchman. She always finds a perspective person, right? A person whose eyes you can see the events of the day through, and so she can describe their experiences as best she's able. Right in a distant mirror, it's the Sire de Coucy, and so I realized I needed to borrow from her and have a perspective character. And so the more research I did, the more I realized that for my purposes, de Condé is the character that I needed for this period, because he is, he's a rock star before the Fronde. He becomes embroiled in the Fronde, both militarily and politically, and then ends up switching sides to the other, supporting the Fronde of the nobility after the judges' revolt. And so, I was thinking okay, well, if I can get the players on that track of being in his coterie and then being forced to choose between him or loyalty to the crown or all these things in 1651, I think, when he flips, 1651. So I was like, okay, he's my perspective character. Great. Where the hell is he in 1648? Okay, well, he fights at the Battle of Lens in 1648. That's no good. That's too much. All right, so I started walking back. I literally started digging through biographies, histories, all these things that I could find. Where the fuck was this guy? What was he doing leading up to these events? And he's in Paris. But what's he doing in Paris? He's talking to Mazarin. Like in the spring, we have documentation, or spring, late winter, he's in Paris with Mazarin, like in council. All right, well, that's no good. That's not a good entry point. Where is he? Holy crap. You go all the way back to the summer of 1647, and he is in Catalonia. And all right, when did he leave Catalonia? Dude, this became my obsession. I dug trying to find out, when did Mazarin send him the letter? Because it's a very Dumas moment to receive the letter from the cardinal and be summoned back to Paris, right? I was like, oh, I need that. I want that. So it turns out that not only is he in Catalonia, he's the viceroy of Catalonia. And I'm like, wait, what is going on here? And then I just started to untangle the history of what was going on and why he ended up as the viceroy of Catalonia. And then I very, very soon after, I see these two magical words on the page in front of me. Reaper's War. El Segador? What the fuck? Yes. Okay, 100% locked in. We're going to figure this out. This is so cool. And then it just gets cooler. He is sent down there to fail by Mazarin. He is an undefeated general, and he's sent down to siege Lerida. Forgive my pronunciations.
No, that's fine.
And he fails. He retreats, and he's bummed, and then he gets the letter. And I was like, okay, we found it. This is perfect, right? And it turns out that, that in a very savvy move, Pau Claris and his cabal had, gotten the French support by declaring themselves a county of France, or offering the French command. Very, very, very savvy politics there on their part to earn protection against the depredations of the vampire king of Spain. So it just was perfect. Like all the politics were there. And you have this, right? It presented this moment of the delivering of the letter, but also a moment of 20 years after-esque tragedy, where smash cut, the early playtesters were like, why aren't we starting in the siege? Why are we just talking about the siege? And I'm like, bruh, you do not want to be in that siege. You do not. That is the end. That is not the beginning of your character. That siege, if you want to start there, that is the end. So right, it's this great moment of tragedy to begin on, of this moment of kind of reflection and pause, and okay, well, we survived, but that was bad. Let's not talk about it anymore. And then I just had this flash of okay, he gets his letter from the cardinal in Barcelona, and then he turns to his minions and says, all right, I'm going back to Paris, but you all are going to do one more errand for me here in Catalonia before we go. And then the more I read, I just became obsessed with these locations around the country that I was reading about that just seemed so beautiful and remote and so different than what they are now. The climb up to the pas de casa would have been completely different during that period, right? None of the roads were there. Like all this like civic engineering has been done in the 20th century, and so it would have just been this completely different, very arduous, magical climb. Anyway, just like it just was perfect. It just like it appeared out of the mists. It's a validation of doing research and like looking into history and looking for details, because also like the more I read about the Catalan culture and like how like modern minded the Catalan were in terms of government and representation, and resisting what was like literally the empire of evil in Europe at the time. Like the Spanish crown is like no bueno, like terrible. So like what a great people to fight on the side of. So just perfect.
Okay, so thank you for the whole narrative. You made me think of the story about the donkeys, but I think we'll leave that for the readers to find out. I'm just wondering if it is historical as well.
Absolutely not. So. That is no. That's me being an inventor. But de Condé was known to have a sense of humor and to be a practical joker, and that like those their retinue, Gramont, his second in command, and then his cousin or younger brother, I don't know. All of them were all a bunch of scoundrels, and would play practical jokes on one another.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know. Do we still have time for one or two more?
Sure, go for it.
Yep. There is one which is a bit we've read on about Misèries being a Noah's Ark game. No, then some of our colleagues mentioned to us that it doesn't feel much like a Noah's Ark game in terms of mechanics, but we still would like to ask you if a Noah's Ark game, from your point of view, lives in the system or it lives in the spirit of the game. Would you call Misèries and Misfortunes a Noah's Ark game?
That's up to you, man. I don't like labels. I don't like cults. I love the occult. I do not like cults. I do not like labels. I use them reluctantly. When I do employ them. So, like, on one hand, I don't understand why it's not. It seems to be the very thing. However, there seems to be an ideological stance that one must adopt to be a part of that label regarding this veneration of the past and this veneration of honestly retrograde ideas that I'm not terribly interested in terms of like the power of the game master or like what a game mechanic can and can't do. And I think that the design space, whether you're using a 20-sided die resolution or D6s or having no dice or whatever, I think the design space is just massive. I think that those choices are superficial. So, yeah, I don't understand why it's not, but I would never call it that.
And I think that... do you want to ask a question, Xavi? I think.
Yeah, I have it. You hear me?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. As you know, all good role play authors are usually well-read persons. So, for example, the Catalan source book is called as a George Orwell novel. So I saw at the same time so many references of Shakespearean plays in the core book. So, what kind of influences did you have for the creation of this game on other literary influences more than far away from Alexander Dumas to create this game and other like Burning Wheel?
Sure. Orwell's there, man. Like he is on my shoulder in this game. I was so delighted to find that and to be able to express my love of that book. And there is a passage in that book where he describes two trains, I think, coming into Barcelona. One train full of soldiers who are going to the front, and they're singing, and their bayonets are shining in the sunlight, and they're so optimistic. And then another train of soldiers coming back from the front, wounded and weary, and heads hung low. And obviously that passage has stuck with me from the moment I read it. And that dichotomy of it's, to me, it's just so representative of our modern human condition, or, really like, and I guess by modern, I mean, since we started having armies and cities and wars and religions and whatnot. But it speaks so much about war itself, the nature of war, that we have this naive optimism that we are going to survive, that we are going to be the victors, but really what comes back is tragedy and broken bodies and broken minds. And so that spirit is very much in Homage Catalonia. You are on that other train coming back, right? You're on the second train. So, and then for the rest of the game, more specifically, of course, like lots and lots of Dumas, like the language stuff. I take passages from Dumas and I'm like, here, do something impossible. Try to speak like Alexander Dumas writes. I mean, it's utterly impossible. But I also got to really open myself up to other works, like to Shakespeare. I'm not a theater major, but I have been around actors for the past 30 years. They always remind me about these things. But getting to quote Shakespeare and have it be contemporary, or in this case, actually, it's even more ticklish in that Shakespeare is out of fashion in 1648. It's kind of like it's this English dude that wrote these historical plays and shit, 50 years ago, like whatever. Right? So it's delightful to think about that. But also to be able to go into the alchemical texts and the grimoires, the historical stuff, and quote them, in this game, and have them be meaningful. Have nothing. None of the quotes in the game are ahistorical or atemporal or anachronistic, whatever. Anachronistic is the word. I'm making sure that everything is coming from, I think I set the limit at 1652 and back. Even though the year is 1648, we're gonna try to roll the clock forward to 1652 with a couple ideas. So being able to like go and read Cervantes with that in mind, that this is contemporary literature that he wrote, and that he is, right. To me, it's just fascinating that Cervantes then would be processing his experiences, his life, his political opinions through this hilarious work of fiction. And so to be able to incorporate a little bit of that, like in Homage Catalonia, it's he has his quote about Barcelona in there, and so it just gives me a whole new perspective on life and on me and my present day, and I feel like I hope that by giving these historical or historical texts, or even these works of fiction that you may have read or could go read, that I provide touchstones for you, that we can start to build some shared vision of the whole thing, and yeah, that that I hope that I can open the door to a really, really strange fantasy world like an incredibly challenging fantasy world to step into. Right, these things, like the works of literature, the plays, the alchemical texts and whatnot, these are stepping stones to get you on that path to go backwards and to try to get you to see the world as they did, which is so hard. So hard. So yeah, I hope that answers your question about like how I tried to work these things in.
Yeah, sure.
Wow, great answers, and I think that we've covered most of what we wanted to ask. We still have some curiosity about any future plans for Miseries and Misfortunes, in case you mentioned that you are planning to go to the east, I think. So I don't know if you are planning to have any scenarios in the United States or whatever. But I don't know if you can tell us about that.
Yeah, the plans, I have to, based on what I know about the history right now, I think I have to go to Prague for one episode. I have an idea for an adventure in Prague that is similar in its gravity to the one that de Condé sends you on in Homage Catalonia. It's really fun. It's actually historical though. This one, the insane errand that is given to you by someone who is anointed by God to rule is completely historical. And so I found that, and then I was actually in Prague recently, and I was like, okay, I think we should go there. But the next conflagration point in Europe going east is Polish-Lithuania. The Cossacks War. There are some battles happening that summer. Of course, I want to briefly return to France for the Battle of Laon, which is the final. There's one of the penultimate battles of the 30 Years' War is in Prague, and then the final one is when de Condé breaks the back of the Habsburgs in Laon, in northern France. So I definitely want to come back to that. But then I have a source about the Italian underworld also there, which might just be too good to pass up. I just might have to do a scenario with some life paths for that. But the place that I really want to do research on is Astrakhan on the Black Sea, the northern shore of the Black Sea, because apparently it was quite a place in 1648, where it's this crossroads of many different types of cultures. So like that's how I'm imagining kind of winding my way through Europe, out of Europe through Polish-Lithuania into the Ukraine, and then over to Astrakhan. And then from there, we'll see. I mean, I know what's going on in Vietnam and China, in Indonesia, the Philippines and Japan. Those are places I all want to touch. I know I have a vague idea. But the Americas and Africa are the hardest because they are situations containing some of the worst human misery in all of human history in 1648. And so I just want to make sure by the time I get there that I am an old, wizened, thoughtful game designer before I have to touch that level of human misery.
Oh. Okay, I think that we should leave it here because I don't think this can get any better. You've been a great, you're very interesting. Your answers were great, and thank you very much for your time. We look forward to publish this. We already have the copy, a print copy. Okay, it came out really nice, and we'll be sending it to you very soon. Okay, I think we're receiving it tomorrow. So thank you a lot for your time. I don't know, Xavi, if you would like to say anything else.
So thank you so much. That's all. I don't have more voice right now.
Okay, so thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you both for having me on this the interview, but also thank you so much for loving this work and translating it. This is beyond my hopes. Like, I am so
Really?
excited to have this translated into Catalan. Yeah, and I hope I can come visit you one day. And I'm super excited.
Yes, I meant to say that, well, sadly for now, we cannot invite you over, but maybe at some point we will be able to change this and make it possible that you come to Barcelona at some point. And that's all. And I hope also that with our publishing, maybe some Spanish company also or French company decides to publish this, which totally deserves to be published. And without more to say, thank you very much and take care. Bye.
Thanks.
So yeah.